And all of these police officers jumped out of the car out of nowhere. I was like, get down, get down. You know, growing up in the inner city of Minneapolis, I think you're inspired as a little boy to be a football player or a professional athlete. Yeah, I would never imagine that I will be doing what I'm doing today. I was born in Galveston, Texas. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, so we're all a year and a half apart. My mom used to dress us like triplets. My biological father, I didn't know until I became an adult man. Because of that, you know, growing up, I remember having conversations with my mom like who my dad is, and always feeling like this sense of not knowing who I was, not having a true identity, especially being a young man. My stepfather, he was just a very intimidating man. Yeah, it was a very troubling relationship. And then him and my mother had a toxic relationship. I was born in the 80s. That was like the emerging crisis of crack cocaine. But unfortunately, my parents struggled with a crack cocaine addiction. My parents sold drugs. You know, I had memories of watching my mom and my stepfather use cocaine in the backseat of our car a lot of the times. There was times of homelessness. I remember me and my brothers having to sleep in the back seat. The hustle is a way that you kind of manipulate people to be able to get money for drugs. Where one of the hustles, so one of my first exposures to church was my parents' church hustle. I remember like being coached by my mom, me and my brothers, that when we would get in front of the pastors and she started saying like we need money for food, that we would start at that point saying, we're hungry, mom, we're hungry, mom, we're hungry, mom. And what that would do is sometimes the pastors would give her money because it's just like they felt bad for us as kids. And other times it didn't work. They would take us to the grocery store. They were wise. They could probably figure out what they were doing. I remember one specific time, me and my stepdad, we had went into a church and they were having a prayer meeting. And there were all these purses sitting out on the pews. So my dad told me to come on really quick. And right before we left, he grabbed one of the purses. We jumped in the car and my mom was driving, and I remember us taking off. My mom had made a lot of bad choices. She went up to Minnesota to give a fresh start. As a little boy, my mom would have us do different things and do chores, and one of the chores was doing laundry. They had a laundry room in the basement. And one day we had a little bouncy ball that you get out of the 25-cent candy ball machine. And the ball had bounced around and ended up going up under one of the washers or dryers. And as me and my brother went to go fish it out, instead of getting the ball, we ended up pulling out these white bags of substance that ended up being crack cocaine. And I remember taking that up to my mom and giving that to her at the time, just because I didn't know what else to do with it as a kid. To my senior year, my mom abstained from drugs and alcohol. We were able to live in some better places and better neighborhoods. Growing up in poverty, growing up in inner city, being surrounded by gangs and drugs and all of that stuff, it like opened up my eyes for the first time that life can be better and life could be different. I felt like because of my mom's early years in addiction, she really wasn't, she didn't really make sure I stayed on top of my homework or, you know, go to teacher conferences and things like that. I was a ladies' man, I would say, back then, as most teenage boys are. And because of that caused me to make some poor decisions with my sexuality, and I ended up impregnating 2 girls my senior year. So I dropped out of high school, and then by the time I was 21, we had already split up, and then that's when I started tampering with drugs and alcohol. Actually, my inception with that started with just medicating the pain of a broken marriage, you know, and a lot of poor decisions I made in that marriage.
I remember we were in a parking lot at a retail store. It was the middle of the night, and I remember both of them were pulling. You know, one had my right arm, the other had my left arm, and they were pulling me and arguing about which one was going to take who. And then, of course, my mom called the police, and so then my dad fled. You know what I mean? And so that was a pretty sad moment, because it was like, you know, I was like, why can't I just have you both?
As a young man, I started drinking. I started clubbing like most 21-year-olds would do, and that quickly progressed into using marijuana. Next thing you know, I had this brilliant idea to start selling marijuana. And then before you know it, by the time I was 22 years old, I was a full-blown drug dealer selling cocaine And that became the lifestyle in which I lived for a greater part of 6 years.
And was very much a daddy's girl, and I could just see him doing no wrong in my eyes when I was little.
This very apartment building here is where I got my first bag of cocaine from my dealer before I became a cocaine dealer. That very apartment building. At that time, I was selling marijuana, and we could make more money selling cocaine.
There was a lot of stuff going on in my early childhood days. I was going through a lot of physical abuse from my mom's boyfriends. So there was a lot of trauma being created, and not having him there as often definitely created some separation and some, I wanted him to be there for me, and he wasn't.
My earliest memory of my dad would be coming and picking me up, and we would go to the mall together and go shopping, and whatever I wanted, I got.
Living in where there's a lot of gang activity and there's a lot of drug dealers around, I saw a lot of things that created a lot of PTSD, guns pointed at me, people coming with AK-47s and just these big guns, and they're all pointing, and they're yelling at my mother, yelling at, the abuser, my abuser at the time, and just there was just a lot of that. I was being introduced into a lot of that and how dangerous that life is.
And then my mom began dating, and out of her dating, she started tampering with alcohol again, and she opened up that door, and then she just became completely immersed in her alcoholism. She had a daily alcohol use where she was drinking probably a liter of hard alcohol a day.
When I was growing up, I remember always hearing my friends talk about what their dads did, or my dad's a plumber and my dad does this, and I never knew what my dad did. So I asked my mom, and she told me that he was a drug dealer. And I said, no, he's not. And then I remember the day that I found out that he was a drug dealer.
I just remember very vaguely that I was in my dad's car at one point, and my mom had called the police on him, threatened that he had a gun and that he had threatened her. I think he found out about the people that were abusing me, and that made him angry. So I remember the police surrounding the block of our whole house, and they were pointing their weapons at my dad, telling him to get out. I was stuck in the car, and I remember they arrested my father, and they took me out of the car, and I was kicking the officer and crying and asking for him to come back, don't leave, And so they're bringing me to my mom's house, and after all of that, my mom explained to me what my dad was doing.
I was at my dad's, and he picked me up, and I was hanging out with his girlfriend's daughter at the time, and he told us to go upstairs. And the townhome that we lived in, you could go up the stairs, and there was a balcony where you could see down and see everything. And so I went upstairs, but I was a curious little kid, and so I looked over the edge of the balcony just to see what he was doing, and I saw a guy with crutches walk in. I saw them do drugs together, and that was the day that I realized that my mom was right, and it kind of broke me.
So a confidential informant is someone who is struggling with addiction or got caught by the police with a certain amount of drugs where they're trying to avoid prison time. So we were a part of that plan for another individual. So me and my brother got set up by the task force in a suburb of Minneapolis. And man, I'll never forget this day when we get off on this road and there's all of these Ford Explorers, but they were unmarked cars. You can tell they were police, but there were 2 in front of us, 3 behind us. And all of these police officers jumped out of the car out of nowhere. I was like, get down, get down. And me and my brother were like, what do we, I'm in the driver's seat. He's not. And I froze. I'm just like, cause you didn't know what to do. All these cops are pulling all these big guns. And my brother was just like, just go. Like, what do we have to lose? And at the time we had a lot of cocaine. I won't mention how much, but we had enough cocaine to put us away for a long time. And so, yeah, we ended up leaving. I hit another police car to move that one out the way. And I had a Ford Explorer too at the time. And Yeah, we end up eluding the police for about a good 10 minutes. We got rid of the drugs. Yeah, but they ended up still catching us, and we ended up in jail. Never found the drugs, but we were looking at conspiracy to sell first degree, and that carried an 86-month sentence. And we were incarcerated in a county jail. My mom visited us one time, and she told us that she didn't feel like she was going to be here much longer. She must have been 41 at this time. And she said, "Please promise me that you won't go back to drug dealing." And I remember telling my mom, "I promise you I won't." Now, during this time, I was praying and I was asking God, like, "Lord, please help me get out of this. I promise you I'll stop selling drugs. I won't do this again." And we were able to get a lot of probation. We owed so much restitution for hitting the police cars on a high-speed chase that I was a felon at that time, and I was trying to work, and I was trying not to use. I was trying to keep a promise to my mom. And then I got a call. I got the worst call that I could get. I recall my brother telling me that, "Man, you gotta come. Mom's not breathing, and the paramedics are here trying to bring her back." And as I literally walked in the room, my brothers are standing alongside of the paramedics, and they had literally just stopped trying to do CPR and had just pronounced her dead. And it was in the autopsy that I found out that my mom had hepatitis, and she was told that she had to stop drinking for her to get a liver transplant. But they wouldn't put her on the list unless she stopped drinking. So in terms, I watched my mom really kill herself. I was still using marijuana very heavily. So when we talk about like the perception of marijuana, right? Like it's a gateway, and it was the gateway back to my lifestyle of becoming a cocaine dealer again. Now selling drugs this time around, I was able to sell more drugs, and I was able to get more drugs at a cheaper price, and which brought in more money, which brought in more of that lifestyle of feeling like I'm making it in life, right? I was driving nice cars, and the money and false sense of power that you get and control that you get with selling drugs. There was a sense of identity with that, and coming from nothing, you really wanted to just get more, you know? And so then listening to a lot of like hip hop and rappers who were former drug dealers and became rappers, that became something I was trying to do, and it was the pursuit of happiness, or what I thought was happiness, but it came at the cost of losing all of the morals and ethics, and destroying a lot of lives. Things got really dark. Yeah, life just got really, really, really dark. Having, you know, somewhat of a moral compass of right and wrong, right, and good and evil, and hearing that growing up in church, it's like you're suppressing the truth constantly to get what you want. There's a couple of times I came close to some like losing my life in that lifestyle of being robbed one time at gunpoint, and all of these things happen in this lifestyle, that all because you're just trying to chase what you think is going to make you happy. My relationship with my kids completely got severed. I had not seen my kids for 2 or 3 years.
When I was little and my dad wasn't around a lot, it was very hard because, again, I saw all of my friends and their dads were at everything, and I just felt like he wasn't fully there to support me, and I felt like he had other priorities, and I could feel that as a child, that I wasn't probably his number one priority. He said I was, but I don't think that I felt that way.
I would go up northwest Minnesota, and I would sell a bunch of drugs. It just so happened when I went up there on July 26th in 2008, I got caught with $1,002 in one pocket and multiple baggies of cocaine in the other pocket, enough to put me away for 120 something months.
I found it funny that he's an African American man selling drugs at a country music festival, and he didn't think he'd stand out in rural Minnesota.
It was the perfect storm for God to get my attention, is what I look at it as. I was 3.5 hours away from the cities, and when you're in the lifestyle of selling drugs and you get caught by the police, none of your friends are answering the phone. Nobody's gonna come visit you.
They had brotherhood, and they said that they had brotherhood. We'll be here for you, but it was not a real brotherhood, you know.
It's not a matter of if I'm going to prison. It's a matter of how long am I going to prison. And that terrified me.
I really never got a, say, definite answer of whether my dad was going to come back or not. We ended up going to see someone, one of our boyfriends that had just gotten put in prison for murdering someone. And she said that we're going to go see my father. So we went to this prison, went through this step. I had to like take off all my clothes, and like they had to search me and, do all these things. And I remember seeing this guy, and he was not my father, and I knew he wasn't my father, but my mom insisted that this was who he was. And so she would constantly avoid the question, and then I think she told me that you're going to be an adult by the time he comes back. And so I think that kind of scared me a little bit.
When you're in jail, everybody becomes your attorney. Like all the inmates are telling you, and everybody's looking at each other's paperwork, and everybody's sharing like, man, you should do this, or you should try to circumvent this, or find this loophole. The whole thing is to get out of trouble, right? Like minimize however much time you're supposed to get. Not really admit your fault. Never tell on yourself. Like these are the things and the truths that you adopt living in that lifestyle. I would always seek God, like because I knew of God, and I knew that God would, God had abilities and powers to get me out of trouble. But that's all God was to me, was like he was my get out of jail free card. Going to church was nothing different than getting up and watching cartoons. It was just something that we did. It wasn't something I really truly understood. So I started doing like what I would typically do. I started watching TBN. That's a Christian channel. They have a bunch of religious shows. And every morning I had this religious act that I'm going to earn getting myself out of trouble with God. And so I would get up every morning, watch my shows, and you don't get glue in jail. So, you get toothpaste, and you can use toothpaste as glue. So if you didn't know that, now you know. So we would have toothpaste, and I would write these scriptures, because you get paper, and I would write these scriptures. And all the scriptures that I would write was geared to like faith and like God moving mountains, right? My perception of using even scripture to manipulate God to get me out of trouble. And I would do that, and God in his grace and his mercy allowed me to go to a Bible study that they were having in the county jail. I went a couple times, and this pastor, he was just a little chubby guy of a pastor. Me and him had nothing in common. Like there's nothing I could relate to with him. Like he was just like a country little pastor that would come in and love on us inmates and talk about the gospel. But one specific time, as I'm like seeking God on this conditional, what I would call a conditional surrender, he just tells me the gospel the way I need to hear it. And he just said, you guys need to stop playing games with God. Like God knows everything. He knows when you're serious, when you're not. He knows when you're trying to manipulate him. And he just said that here's how you'll know if you truly surrendered to God. Because many of you think you surrendered to God. And he said, here's how you'll know. He said, is if you can tell God to send you to prison, like trust your life with God, own up to everything you did, don't play the game, and completely turn your life over to God. It's the only way you'll know that you're truly surrendered. And I just was so angry with him. At first, I was just like, who are you to tell me the scriptures? I got toothpaste on my cell, who are you to tell me? I watch, TBN every morning, 5 days a week, at this time I had been locked up for like a month or so. And I'm like, who's this guy to tell me that, like how I need to have a relationship with God, or what I need to do to have a relationship with God. Like I'm doing all of the religious things to have this relationship with God. But what I heard was like, there's these conditions on my surrender. And I know I had to respond to that. And my number one contingency with the Lord was the but. He kind of talked about the but. Like if you go to God and you say, God, can you do this? But it was like, Lord, I surrender, but, or surrender if. And there was that conditional if, that, Lord, I will serve you. I will walk with you. I will be done with, I know I said it before, but I'll be done with all of this lifestyle if you get me probation and I don't have to go to prison. So that was my condition. That was my if with God. And I was holding God hostage to that, to really surrender. So when I heard this pastor speak to me, I really heard God speak to me and say that if you really want a relationship with me, you need to fully surrender. And I went back to my cell that night, Still pretty angry at that pastor. But I kneeled down that night and I said to God, I said, Lord, even if you send me to prison, I just really want to know you. I want to live for you. Like I'm done with this lifestyle. And even if it means you send me to prison, God, like I'll just have to trust you that you'll protect me, and but at least I'll have you. And at that moment, God's presence came in that jail cell, and like there was just kind of like this washing that came, and I'm even crying even more, but it was like a peaceful cry. When this washing that happened to me with that experience of like removing all the conditions, all the contingencies on my surrender to the Lord. And I woke up the next morning freer than I ever felt in a jail cell, still heading to prison. I remember like just walking around that scared, looking up at the sky, just feeling such peace, such freedom. And so much peace that I'm like, he's giving me all this peace because he wants me to be okay with going to prison. Like, so that's in the back of my mind. And I know that I surrendered that to God, but there's still like this sincere, genuine fear of going to prison. But then I began to read scripture, and now I wasn't reading scripture from this aspect of how can I find the scripture to manipulate God to give me what I want. I started looking at scripture from a place of how do I get more of this peace? How do I know more of Jesus? Like, who is he? What is he like? What does he want? What does he demand of me? Like, what does this relationship look like? It became more like focused on him than focused on me. And as I'm talking to my lawyer, I was just asking him, is there any mercy? And he's like, no, they want to make an example out of you. Like, they want to see you go to prison, and he wants to give you the top of the box, which was like 120 something months. And knowing that, okay, like I'm guilty of what I've done, like, and truly to walk with Jesus, right, means that you got to walk in truth. And as I'm reading all of these scriptures, they're coming alive to me. Like I can't try to manipulate this. Like I broke the law of Minnesota by what I was doing, but there was a higher transgression of breaking the law with God. And when you understand, when I start seeing my crimes and the things that I was doing, the lifestyle that I was living as sin, and how that hurt God, like it changed my perspective on how I just wanted to live my life and how I wanted to own what I needed to own just so I can move forward and be free of, not trying to manipulate anymore. They had me in maximum security. So the jail that I'm locked up in at this time, they got me in maximum, and they're like the old school bars, like it clink, 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 clink. And so that was just so depressing for me. And I was always praying before, like I really committed my life to the Lord, like, Lord, get me out of here. Like, this is depressing, And they moved me to a pod of 8 guys. And I would get up in the morning and I would still do my TBN thing. I watched the religious shows, and there was a native guy that took notice of that, and he just said, hey man, you like that religious stuff, maybe your lawyer can get you in the teen challenge. I tell my public defender about it. I'm like, hey man, like there's this Christian program, and he just like shut it down right away. Like, don't get your hopes high. The prosecution, they caught you with all these drugs and money. Like, I don't see it happening, but go ahead and submit the application. I got the acceptance letter back within a week. Teen Challenge said that they would allow me to come to their program on the basis that the courts would sentence me there instead of sentencing me to prison. And I remember my attorney, my public defender, he said, okay, we're gonna get a chance at Teen Challenge at the end. He said, you gotta say this, but don't say that, and say this and don't say that, right? He's like trying to coach me as an attorney should. But I was just so like engulfed in God and just wanted to walk in honesty. Like, I kind of was listening to him, but when I got up there, and I just told it all. I mean, I probably talked about stuff that they didn't even have in the records. It was like just truth kept coming out, and I'm crying, and I'm telling the judge that, Judge, I've changed my life, and I got God in my life. Like, they haven't heard that 1,000 times, but it was sincere for me, And I remember looking at my attorney. He's like beat red. He's like, oh my gosh, this guy just nailed himself to a cross. Like, he's going to prison for sure now. Like, almost like he had lost all hope based on what I was doing. This prosecutor did an amazing job, like making sure that the judge knew why he should not sentence me to Teen Challenge, why I did not deserve a second chance. This judge, he stared at me for like probably a minute in the quiet. It was like he was staring into my soul. And then this moment, like whatever's coming out of his mouth next is my destiny, right? Like, either whatever he's getting ready to say is like, I'm going to prison or I'm not going to prison. And he he starts off by saying, "Mr. Johnson."
I don't know why I'm doing this. This goes against my better judgment, but I'm going to send you to Teen Challenge.
And I just begin to weep. I mean, my lawyer's jaw dropped. He just thought that he was doing the formality, but he had already told me, like, chances are, man, just plan to go to prison. The bailiff that transports you from the courtroom and out said, "Hey, man, I just want you to know there's a lot of guys that come in here talk about the God thing, and I see it on the regular." He said, "But I know that God's really touched your life." He's walking me back to my cell, and he goes, "I was praying for you the whole time." And excuse me, and it's just, it's like this, jail staff gets such a bad rep, but here's this Christian jail staff that God would have in the courtroom, where a huge decision was getting ready to be made about my future, that he would be praying for me. I never forgot that moment, that this bailiff was like literally praying, warring in the spirit for me to get Teen Challenge, because he knew that the relationship I had with Jesus was real.
Do I think he was going to become a changed person? No, I didn't really think that at the time.
And I remember walking in there, and they took me to the intake room after they got my shackles off, and so I'm being processed, and this little short, 5'4" nothing guy. He walks into the room, and he just has me stand up, and he just gives me the biggest body hug.
And he kind of squirmed a little bit.
It was a little uncomfortable because, one, I didn't know what it felt like to be hugged by a father, because I didn't have my biological father. And then my stepdad rarely hugged us or showed that type of affection.
But of a lot of our guys, they've come from such a place of self-hatred and brokenness that I just want them to know and remember that the most important thing is you're loved here.
I guess I didn't think my dad was going to be a changed person because I didn't really understand God. I didn't really understand that there is transformation. And so I just thought he was going to go there, clean up, and then go back to living life. We would just go back to being normal after he got out.
And so I began writing letters to my kids, to their moms, and to my kids' grandma, and just writing letters to my kids and telling them how sorry Dad was and the lifestyle that I lived.
I mean, he would write me. I still have them to this day.
I don't know if he did or not. If he did send letters, I wasn't getting them.
Hi, sweetheart. I hope when you get this letter, it brightens up your day. I was so happy to read in your letter how you prayed to God about Isabella and Tyrese picking on you, and God helped.
I just got emotional because I hadn't heard that letter since I wrote it.
I know. I haven't read it since I was 9.
It's crazy. Wow.
And that was a very big switch for me to suddenly feel like he actually wanted to have a deeper relationship with me. I felt like a priority all of a sudden.
I did send my son letters.
Are you aware that he never got them?
I am not aware of that until today when he shared that with me. But his mom, rightly so, she was still pretty hurt by some of the things I did back in my past. So I wish she would have got them, because, man, at that time in my life, I really was trying to just make amends to my kids and come into a place where just my behavior and the things that I did, I wanted so much for them to know how much I loved them and how much I wanted to make that right. And
And so watching him early on in the program, he actually sat in the back of chapel, usually on the floor in the back against the wall, and most of the time crying. Vaushawn spent a lot of time crying his way through the program. That's a sign of somebody who's just really broken and desperate and wanting change. He didn't cry his way all day long, but you could see there was a tenderness in him, a desperation. He wanted whatever it was God had for him, he wanted it.
To finally, my daughter's mom ended up, just surprising me one day and came up to visit me with my daughter. And I had not seen my daughter for like 2.5 years at this point. So you're nervous because I don't know what she's, I don't know what she's gonna be like. I don't know, like, she's gonna be mad at me because of,
And I just remember like running to him and like I was so excited to see him.
she jumps up in my arm as if she's 2 years old and wraps her legs around my waist, and it was just a moment of restoration that, again, that I attribute to like just God's grace and His mercy. Because of the lifestyle I live, I can buy my kids anything because I sold drugs. So I always had money. So when they were around me, before I became estranged from them as a drug dealer, like, I always take them out to the Mall of America. I always go buy them new shoes. I always do all of these things. Well, when you're a teen challenge, you're just broke. And I remember being concerned, like, man, I can't do what I used to do.
I remember wanting to go do the things that we normally do. Can we go to the mall? Can we go like do the stuff we used to do? And he was like,
baby, I got $92. We got to try to stretch this out on this day pass. It was this moment that changed my whole perspective on parenting. And I said,
Aviva, I don't have the money to do that anymore. And I just remember saying, that's okay, Dad, because I just want to hang out with you.
and that was it, It was just like the Lord showed me at that moment, like, a lot of, I think in our culture even today, like there's even like outside of drugs and alcohol, I think that parents miss that a lot. And I still see that, just that kids don't really care about the stuff as much as we think they do. They care about being with us.
That was a big changer for him, that I didn't see him still through the eyes of what I saw him before. He was a different person, and I'm okay with not doing those things. I wasn't hurt by those things. As long as I got to hang out with him, that was good enough for me. So,
but I definitely enjoyed seeing him. It had been such a long time.
when my dad was in Teen Challenge, he invited my mom and I to come to one of the worship nights that they had. And I just remember just feeling so at peace in that place. And they asked if anyone wanted to give their life to the Lord. I just decided from that day forward I was going to be a Christian because I saw a little bit of the transformation that was happening in my dad. And I said, I want whatever he wants. And I want what this change that's like overcoming him, I want that as well.
Well, we would go out every Sunday to these different choir trips, and you sing songs and tell testimony. Well, there's one specific church that I shared my testimony on a choir trip. Well, this Christian football coach who was a recruiter was in the audience. Afterwards, he comes up and talks to me and says he may have an opportunity for me to play college ball at this Christian. Like, dude, I'm a former drug addict, drug dealer in a treatment program, and I'm 28. I'm washed up. Like, I'm 28 years old at this point. There's nobody recruiting 28-year-olds for one. They're definitely not recruiting someone with a background like me. And I'll never forget going to talk to my director, and and I said, man, what should I do? I just want him to tell me what to do. And he like leans in and he goes, you do the one that glorifies God the most. Didn't give me an answer. That's not what I was looking for. But he's like, you better pray about it and you better do the one that glorifies God. So I go back, I pray that night, and I said, Lord, I don't want to mess this up. So it became about like, God, what is your will for my life more than what I want? That very night, I had a very vivid dream about going to the Ministry Institute. And that was God's way of telling me that the football thing was not him. All my guys in the program, like, you're crazy. Like, why would you give up this opportunity? And then I got custody of my son, like at the end of that 2-year journey. My former wife had said that she was having some real problems with our son. He was 10 at this point.
My dad is a different story. My mom has a different story, so I never knew who to believe.
She's just like, I need you to take him. Like, he needs his dad. Like, he's beyond what I can do anymore.
I was lying a lot, so I had previously only been lying because every time I lied, I got out of being abused, and if I told the truth, I would get abused. So it was like, if I lied, I could kind of hold myself away from it, but at some point, it was going to happen. So I kind of carried that with me when I moved in with my dad, and my dad didn't like that, He didn't like that I was lying, and he was wondering why I was lying so much, I definitely didn't like him for a while. And I felt like I had this resentment and hatred for him. It took me until I would say, until I was 19 to fully really say, like, okay, my dad's, not this way. He's going through his own emotions, and he was trying to repair some of the anger that he had from his previous, from previous life. It took a while, but I think where we are now is a lot better. I think our relationship is starting to build. I think that he was different by spending time with me more, you know what I mean? Instead of saying, here's the game, here's a few movies, you watch this and you play around, and so I think that was a lot different. I would drive to a lot of the neighborhoods where I was abused, look at that house, and I would say, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, and I'd forgive everything that the past people have done to me. And after about 6 to 8 months, I forgave them fully, and I wished good on them instead of bad. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want to find them and give them the same treatment they gave me. I wanted them to get better treatment than I got. So
I really struggle with understanding how a treatment program can tell someone, well, forgive yourself. On what basis should I forgive? Can I claim a right to forgive myself? That there's just out of the blue? Do I just say, oh, well, it's no big deal? To me, it's all about the cross, the burial, and the resurrection of our Lord, because Jesus died on the cross for my sin. And that knowledge transforms me. Now that I know that God forgave me, He made a way for me to experience grace and mercy. And when I know that I've been forgiven, I can never be the same. Now, when I know that God has forgiven me, that He's accepted me, that He loves me, now I can forgive myself.
You asked the question earlier about what did I aspire to do. Those aspirations were outside of like finding God and what He has called me to do. So I would say that I never saw myself doing it before knowing God. But after knowing God, I believe that's obviously what put me on the track of doing what I'm doing today.
A men's addiction recovery facility has finally found its home in Howard. Adult and Teen Challenge Northeast Wisconsin is in the process of renovating and opening a men's-only faith-based residential treatment program, one of a kind in the Green Bay area.
It's no secret over the years, addiction is growing rampant here in the northeastern Wisconsin area. Is the reason why we came. Hello, I'm Vaushawn Johnson, and I am the Executive Director for Northeast Wisconsin Adult and Teen Challenge.
I guarantee if you would have told him that 10, 15 years ago, he would look at you and think you were stupid or something, or he would laugh in your face,
A lot of programs, a lot of places, they want to get change to happen on the outside and hope that it translates to the inside. And I don't believe that. I don't think that true change happens from the outside in. It happens from the inside out. And only God can do that work deep inside a person. The one thing about Vaushawn was he meant business. Not everybody's made up their mind yet when they first come into the program that they really want to change, but Vaushawn did.
It's just been such a great journey, and my dad has even said he's seen a complete change in me. Which I saw in him too, and he kind of sparked all of that, which is kind of cool. But it didn't always work out that way or start that way. It just kind of ended that way.
I think, we're a relationship with Jesus that regardless of your circumstances, mine's happen to be jail. We all have to come to a place where Jesus' words, where he talked about in Matthew, where he says, if you don't hate mother, father, brother, sister, like, you're not worthy to be my disciple, and those are very strong words, but it's not that he's telling you to hate your family, but what that word is preference. Like, if you don't preference me above everything in your life, then you're not worthy to be my disciple. And that's really what that pastor was saying to me. Maybe you don't have my experience. Maybe it's you grew up in a picket fence house or whatever. Like, all of us have fallen short of the glory of God, right? Like, all of our sin, all of our good deeds is filthy rags in God's eyesight. The only person that makes us righteous is Jesus, and He sets the standard. He sets the conditions on what that relationship looks like, and He gives it to us for free. It's a free gift, but there are conditions, and this is the condition. It's complete surrender. So I feel like until a person does that, they limit. It's not so much like, man, what does life look like, or what are you missing out on? Like, you limit, like, really knowing God to the degree that you can, because having those limitations on your surrender will prevent you from experiencing God in a greater measure.